ChemDraw allows you to make publication quality structures like these. When used properly, it's also much faster than drawing by hand. You can select all sorts of different functions from the toolbar up here. Holding Control and using the scroll wheel allows you to zoom in and out. With the cursor over empty space, pressing X selects the bond tool. And I can click to add a bond, and click on the end of that one to add another. With the cursor over empty space, pressing Shift X selects the chain tool. You can draw long chains. To get back into the Select tool, also called Marquee, I can press space. That'll automatically select the most recent object, but I can click off of that and click and drag to select other things. Double-clicking part of a structure also selects the whole structure. Note that there are 3 cursor states. One is where the cursor is hovering over empty space, one is where the cursor is hovering over a bond, and you get this blue box, and one is where the cursor is over an atom, and you get that little blue dot. If you just want to change between tools, make sure your cursor is hovering over empty space and there's no lingering dot or box on a structure. You may also use J to select the aromatic ring tool. Let's try drawing ethyl acetate. I'll press Shift X to get to the chain tool. I will draw a chain of 5. I'll press X once nothing's selected to switch back to the single bond tool, and I'll draw that additional bond. Now I can hover over this bond. I could press W to make it a wedge. I could press H to make it a hashed wedge, but I'm gonna press 2 to make it a double bond. Likewise, I could do 3 for a triple or 1 for a single bond. In ethyl acetate, it's a double, and then I'll hover over this carbon here and just press Q to turn it into an oxygen. I could also press W for a nitrogen. Pressing B will give you a bromine. Shift C gives you chlorine, just C gives you carbon. You can also use O and N for nitrogen, but if your left hand is on the home row, it's just quicker to use Q and W. So I'll leave that an oxygen, I'll hover over this atom and make that an oxygen, and we're done. You can also press T to select the text tool, and clicking allows you to type a label. Pressing Escape is the best way to get out of a text box. You can also use the text tool to write formulas of inorganic compounds. Notice the 2 is in subscript. If I select this structure, up on the toolbar there's this formula button. That'll interpret chemical formulas and put the subscripts in the right place. Hovering over anything and pressing backspace or delete gets rid of them. Here you can see I've started drawing a reaction scheme. You can press E to select the arrow tool. And now let's make it look a little nicer. First of all, I'm gonna need some pluses, and I'll use the text tool for that. I'll make sure I'm in the selection tool, and then I will hold Control and Shift and click and drag. And that'll create a new copy. Some of these structures don't look quite right. Here's ethyl acetate. Now I know those bond angles are not correct, and I could go through and manually make them look nicer, but there's a shortcut. If I just double click on any part of this structure, it selects the whole structure, and I'll press Control Shift K to clean up the structure. ChemDraw knows what the right angles are, and it'll make it look nice. Just do the same over here. This isn't quite the way I would usually draw ethanol, so I'll press Ctrl Shift K a couple more times. When I draw a synthetic scheme, I like to line up the atoms in the reactants and the products. So for instance, this CCO becomes this CCO, and I think those should line up. So what I'm going to do is flip this over by selecting the whole structure and press Ctrl Shift B to flip it vertically. Same deal over here, these 2 carbons become these 2 carbons. So to make them line up, I'll select this structure and press Ctrl Shift H to flip horizontally. Remember, on a Mac, that Control key becomes Command. This is looking pretty good, but there's a couple things I want to do to clean it up more. First, I'll select the entire scheme and right-click on part of it. You see we've got this distribute function. So I'm going to distribute horizontally. That way everything is evenly spaced out. I can also align everything. Notice in these right-click menus, there's also associated keyboard shortcuts for all these functions. Here I have a molecule with some stereochemistry. Let's say I want to know what the configuration here is. If I select the whole molecule and go up to the menu bar here and select Object, Show Stereochemistry. This is a great way to check the configuration from an assignment you made by hand. Also in the menu bar, I can select View, Show Analysis window. It shows me the formula of everything that's selected. shows me the molecular weight, and then the exact mass, and the M/Z values are useful for mass spec. You can also add color to a molecule to highlight important groups. I'll select just the carboxylic acid piece, and then this little square up here in the toolbar is the colors. And if I click and hold that, I can select different colors. You can do other for more than just these. I'm gonna pick red, and now I've highlighted a functional group. If you're not happy with the default look of molecules, you can fine-tune things like the bond length and thickness. Start by selecting the whole molecule, and use the menu bar to select Object Settings. I'll change the length to something like 0.15, and I can change the width to 0.015. Let's see what that looks like. This looks a little compressed with the oxygens here, so maybe if I also change the size of the atom labels. That looks alright. Now, if you've made some custom adjustments, you probably don't want to reapply them every time you open ChemDraw. So on that Object Settings window, just select Set Defaults, and then say OK. That applies that standard to the current document, and if you delete any structures, go to File, Save Style Sheet, and you can name it whatever you want. You can see I already have my custom style in here. Then go to File, Preferences, and in the Open and Save section, you can select the location of that style sheet. So I'll select my custom style. Here I'd like to draw the mechanism of an acid-base reaction between hydroxide and acetic acid. I've drawn out all the structures, but there's a couple things missing. First of all, I've got these red boxes around these oxygens, and that's because ChemDraw is recognizing that those aren't quite chemically correct. Up in the toolbar, there's this chemical symbols drop down. I have to click and hold, and then I can select the charge, and I'll click on the atom and drag and place that charge. And now ChemDraw recognizes that as chemically correct. Same deal over here. I'll just click and drag to place that charge. It's kind of attached to the atom. I can rotate it wherever I want, but as soon as I let go, it places the charge. And if I'm drawing a mechanism, I want some lone pairs. So under that same chemical symbols drop down, I can select the lone pair tool. And much like the chart, if I just click on the atom and hold, I can place that lone pair anywhere, and it's kind of anchored to that atom. If I just click, it will place them where it thinks they should go. The lone pair placement is one problem I have with ChemDraw. It always seems to place the lone pairs much too far from the atom. So if I enter my selection tool, I can just select that lone pair and use the arrow keys to get it a little closer to where I think it should be. Really, I want lone pairs on this oxygen because it's the one performing the nucleophilic attack. And finally, we can add some electron pushing arrows. I prefer to use the curved arrows under the arrow menu, and I'll try to draw an arrow from this lone pair to that hydrogen. And of course, it looks very terrible and awkward. So first I'll make the arrow head a little smaller, maybe flip it vertically. Click and drag. If I hover over just the end of this arrow, I can click and drag to decrease the length. It's clear that these electrons are reaching out and grabbing that hydrogen. Now I need one more arrow to show these electrons becoming a third lone pair on this oxygen. It can be a little hard to show that with these short bond lengths. If I'm in the selection tool and I hold Alt and click and drag on that atom, I can make the bond length a little longer so it's easier to see. Might want to adjust that arrow. I can draw from here to there. And again, I will adjust that arrowhead. That looks pretty good. I can take it one step further by selecting both the arrows. I can do that by holding Shift and clicking both of them, and I'll just change the color to something that contrasts. Drawing mechanisms like this can be very time consuming, but once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty quickly, and it looks nice. You'll probably want to put your ChemDraw structures in a word processor at some point. The best way to do this is to use Microsoft Word. I'll select this whole reaction scheme and just press Ctrl-C or Command-C on a Mac, and then in Microsoft Word, Ctrl-V to paste. This is the best way to share structures because it copies them as vector images. Notice how no matter how far I zoom in, the image still looks crisp and sharp. If you're using Windows, there's also a special bonus, where if I click on any structure that I've pasted into a Word document, it opens just that in a ChemDraw file, and I can add edits and then just close out of that window, and those changes are reflected in Word. The best way to paste structures into Google Docs is to select what you want to copy, go to Edit, Copy As, and select PNG, that's an image file. And in Google Docs, just press Ctrl V or Command V to paste that structure. This does still look pretty nice, but if I resize it, it does get a little pixelated if I zoom in a lot.